No,
It also reminds me a little bit as you're talking about that there's a game I've been playing called Far Cry 6, which maybe the students maybe have heard me refer to or not in class, but it's primarily a first person shooter. So, we were talking about that earlier briefly. But one of the things that I love about it is they've overlaid that game and they put in a chapter for Stranger Things, the Netflix series. And so all of a sudden you're playing in your own little universe that the game has created, but then they take the sidestep and have this whole another narrative that you never expected happening. And it's a way to keep repeat gameplay. It's a way to bring in an outside media series that we've always kind of wondered. If you're a fan of the series, it's a very unusual mixed, light dark universe, and the story of the young people who go through that adventure. But you get pulled into that as a character in a way you're never expected to. So in both those experiences, what you're describing, that unexpectedness, that thing you have to figure out, that's
yeah,
something really games are really good at, is putting a puzzle in front of you and then asking you to unpack it. In your case, quite literally, and then through that's an opportunity for the narrative, for the game designer to introduce that narrative, and that leads you down a storyline you never expected to go. Um, so I really appreciate you bringing that example up. Um, and kind of thinking about that, when we're talking about boxes here, we can always think about games and experiences that did not live up to the promises on the outside of the box, so to speak, right? One common mistake that inexperienced designers is what Clint Hawking described as ludonarrative dissonance, which is a conflict between the game's narrative and the story told through the gameplay experience. In your experience, what are some common mistakes you see designers make?
yeah. I mean, uh, I guess every great VR experience is unique in its own way of why it's great. Like it doesn't have some people will like make some things work, but when something doesn't work, um, I think it's a result of trying to say and tell too much, and I think making things a bit too convoluted. And I think the other thing is not having something very interesting to say. But I think broadly, whenever you're interested in something, there's so many different things that you want to convey to people.
Hmm.
But essentializing and figuring out what is going to work, um, is the biggest mistake I see. I see people take on too much and try to do too much and try to make an epic when really, that's not necessary always. It can be very simple and it can be still very beautiful. And I guess, the problem is it's hard to do something simple, because then you have to make sure that that game mechanic and that element of the story really sing and work. But it's better to focus your efforts on figuring that out rather than trying to do too much and think that more is better. And I don't think more is better. More can be boring. And I think you have to really think about respecting people's time and understanding that it does take a lot of commitment for people to engage with what you're doing, and you better be able to draw them in and keep them there. And I think, with a lot of my work, I'm always testing many different things. And testing is so important, because I think you get a good sense. I might have sometimes, mm, sometimes there's some mixed results to some of my work, but nobody wants to take nobody wants to make the experience end sooner than it does, right? And I think that in of itself takes a lot of work, and talent and hard work to ensure that you at least can bring people on a journey, and that it's worth it for them and that they feel engaged with that, and I think that is something that people forget,
Yeah.
because they just think it's important to you, but that's the thing about being human. How do we make our subjectivity feel objectively interesting to others? And I think that is about communication, that is about craft, that is about understanding people's sort of experience, being able to step aside from yourself to understand how it would work. these are things that um, take a lot of effort and time, and everybody has them, but that's one of the mistakes you kind of feel. And I think my work definitely takes on things that I think are more meaningful, and people um are like, oh, I mean, one could think of me as like, about social impact, but I do those things because I just know we hunger to kind of like have our stories be more interesting and have real life impact, and it's a strategy for me to keep people engaged,
Yeah.
you know, and I think you have to find what that is for you, and if it's not a meaningful, quote unquote, traditionally meaningful topic, then it has to have some sort of wonder or some sort of
Mm.
something that is, really draws people to stay in that world.
Mhm. Yeah.
uh, so that's kind of what, are some of the common things I think important.
Yeah, we're kind of dancing around this notion of resonance. It's the emotion with the story and the connection that it makes. You know what I mean? And then making that the essence of the experience of the game. No, yeah, I appreciate that. So, I really appreciate all of your insights. I have one more question here, and that is, because you travel around the world, you see all the cool stuff. And can you just blow our mind for a second? And what are the most amazing things that you're seeing right now in interactive storytelling? And what's blowing your mind right now?
um well, that's a good question. I am um what's blowing my mind is trying to figure out where Web3 and blockchain and NFTs and crypto, all these things that I know are getting a lot of attention, I'm starting to see some use cases that make it feel very artistic and make it feel bring in a lot of game mechanic to a process that people don't necessarily see as something as being artistic. I mean, just an example, there was, an NFT project called Bloom, where it's not two O's, it's two zeros for Bloom. And it's basically, beautifully rendered flowers that wilt or bloom depending on the fluctuations of the cryptocurrency market, right? And it also has something that if you sell it, it blooms in a different way. And so, you know, I think there's just something that's it's the start of a new medium that I know is built with a lot of hype and money and everything. But so is VR and so is meta. Everything. It's tied to that capitalistic way because we are Americans here. But I think there is something that's kind of blowing my mind. There's a NFT artist called Pack, which usually uses a lot of things around value and community and how things work. And I'm curious the journey that a lot of these sort of new companies in this space are trying to take people and trying to make it work beyond just the speculation and the money. So I think that's the most interesting space, and I think it's going to merge with everything else, whether it's games or VR or anything else. So, I constantly am thinking about that. And when I'm exposed to something like that, I find it to be, have a different, it has a different real world consequence than I think just a discrete work of digital art or game or anything else.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and I think there'll be a lot of things going forward with AI, with virtual beings. There's a studio called Fable that did Wolves in the Wall. And I'm good friends with Edward who founded it. And I think, again, those things are kind of mind blowing because I think those are getting more and more sophisticated, those characters, and what they can mean for the future of friendship in some ways. So those are things that I think are two kind of things that I'm very intrigued by and feel are fresh that will reboot and make all of our other work feel different, right? Because
Mm.
so when we have virtual characters within our worlds that have their own agency, what does that mean? when you have, blockchain and you have elements of that into art and into an experience, what does that mean, or how would that look?
Hmm.
So those are the things that are blowing my mind, where I don't know what the best use cases are, but I love seeing new experiments in it. So I again feel that same rush I felt in 2014 when I started working in VR.
Hmm.
Just feel like you're on the forefront of something, and now we're on the forefront of many things, you know,
Hmm.
all happening at once, that I think, will come together, or elements of them will be borrowed into each other.
Yeah.
So those are the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, no, I love the idea. And that's, I think, something that game designers often struggle with is that, you make this thing, you put it out in the world and there it sits, right? Kind of relatively unedited. But the idea of that there could be something external responding to the game that changes the nature of the gameplay. And that makes it feel like every time you go back, it's a different game, it's a different experience. And, your experience of it might be completely different from mine because of the time of day we're playing, or what time of you're in one part of the country, I'm in another part of the country, and just the geolocation of that changes our experience. And that's going to blow my mind.
And I really, like, we have to go beyond the direct, obvious influences. Like, if you like games, you play a lot of games. You like films, you watch them. Yes, but to be honest, some of the more enticing ideas I found are just with contemporary artists. There's, like, I just think, there's this guy named Timo Segal who does performance art, and he's getting a lot of play now. I've loved him for many years, like maybe 10 years, 15 years. But Kanye now loves him, so everyone knows about him. But um, and and he does really interesting things, because he wanted to do art that was contemporary, that had no materials, that was just about performance, that no one could buy, that could be only commissioned, that it could
Yeah.
only be there, and then it just disappears. These types of broader points about value, about art, about what it means in society. These are things that influence everything you can do. Another game, my favorite other game, is called
Yeah.
In Bloom. It's a mobile app game that brings in elements of narrative design and play that's just incredible. It's a puzzle. I think it's Philip Stoltermeyer. He's, I think, German, I think, or from the Netherlands. Sorry, I apologize. But if you check out his game called In Bloom and his other work, it's phenomenally interesting, because again, he's kind of shifting and making a broader comment about what
Hmm.
this could do, and it's incredible. So yeah, it's about being a part of that, about furthering culture and thought, and it's through games. But I think being influenced across the board, reading these things, is still very influential, even though it's a digital world, because, it's just all connected in some ways, isn't it? So we just have to kind of be open to what can inspire us and make us think about things in different and new ways, because that's what we need nowadays. So
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating, and I think the work that you're doing is really amazing, and I appreciate what you and your colleagues are bringing to the forefront and how you're changing all of our minds. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you're up to next. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
thank you.